Let's look a little bit about those dynamics of domestic violence and why it might make it worse. On my research, we have looked at the psychological impact of abuse, and I've called it battered woman syndrome. We've been measuring battered woman syndrome here at NSU's Center for Psychological Studies for many years now. What we have found is that there are 6 factors that are part of battered woman syndrome. The first 3 are part of the post-traumatic stress disorder criteria, that is PTSD. And battered woman syndrome is often considered a subcategory of PTSD. The first criteria for PTSD, besides the threshold criteria, includes intrusive memories and re-experiencing fragments of prior battering incidents. The second group of symptoms are what we call high arousal symptoms. These are hypervigilance, nervousness, jumpiness, avoidance and numbing for emotional responses are the third group of symptomatology. Let's go back over the high arousal and anxiety group and the high avoidance group. And if you remember your early psychology courses, we talked about fight or flight responses. That is, a person or almost any organism perceives danger and gets ready to deal with it. Now, in most cases, that hyperarousal causes the autonomic nervous system to release its chemicals to get us ready to deal with whatever the danger is. That release of those biochemicals causes some of those anxiety symptoms that we can measure through psychological tests that we have, or sometimes we can simply observe it. The high avoidance and numbing is the flight response. Now, most of you, if something dangerous, let's say a bear, walked into your office, you would try to get out and leave as quickly as you could. But what if you can't leave? Such as women and children, for a variety of reasons, have difficulty in leaving. In those cases, we get out of there through psychological means. We call it depression, repression, denial, minimization, dissociation. These are all ways of our mind getting out of there, and it protects us as best we can from the danger. So we measure high avoidance symptomatology, again, using some of those instruments that measure dissociation, that measure depression, and the others that I talked about. We also know that the instruments that we use, such as some of the personality tests, may also measure the high arousal or anxiety features. And the intrusive memories, we have to ask and we have to take a good history so that we understand what are the memories and the fragments of memories that continue to heighten the response and the fear response and the damage from repeated domestic violence incidents. Now, the other 3, I said there were 6 criteria. These are the first 3 criteria. The second 3 criteria are disruptive interpersonal relationships, difficulties with body image and somatic problems, and sexual and intimacy problems. So when we have been looking at all the factors for battered woman syndrome, these are the 6 criteria we see. We see the 3 criteria for PTSD, at least the symptoms of it. They may not meet the actual criteria, but they have enough of the symptoms for it. And then the 3, the disrupted interpersonal relationships, difficulty with body image and somatic problems, and sexual and intimacy problems. Just a word about the disrupted interpersonal relationships. I think it's very important that I use the term disrupted rather than dysfunctional. Sometimes the relationships are dysfunctional, but more often than not, the isolation and the power and control of the batterer to make sure you only relate to those people who he wants you to relate to, causes disruption. And when our clients are able to resume interpersonal relationships without the interference from the batterer, they go back to fairly normal types of relationships. So they have the capability. It's not a dysfunction. I'm also going to talk about the cycle of violence that we found from our research. We know that domestic violence doesn't occur all the time in relationships. In fact, there's a lot of loving behavior that takes place as well. Initially, in what we call a loving courtship period, the batterer treats the woman very well. And that's what she believes is the real person. The abuse then begins, but it does not occur, as I said, all the time. Each relationship has a particular cycle that has 3 particular phases. The 3 phases are the tension building period and the perception of danger, the acute battering incident, and loving contrition. That's very similar to what she saw during the courtship period. And that is the key to the psychological reinforcement for the woman to stay in the relationship, because she believes that the first 2 parts, the tension building and the acute battering incident, are not the real person. They're just sort of an appendage. And if only she could find a way to make him feel better, they'll drop off, and she'll be left with the 3rd stage, or the courtship person that she saw during that period of time. Unfortunately, as you can see from the charts in the PowerPoints that you have to accompany this presentation, the first 2 periods, the tension building and the acute battering incident, only get more frequent, and the loving contrition gets less and less. In the first chart that you'll see is the sort of typical incident where there's tension building, and then there's a period of inevitability and the acute battering incident, and then the tension and the perception of danger drops dramatically, and it actually goes under the horizontal line, which measures time, and becomes loving contrition. In the second chart, you'll see the similar kind of slope on the vertical axis, which measures the amount of tension from 0 to 10 and the amount of perception of danger. So you see the same thing. But if you look at the chart, you'll see that the loving contrition is gone, and all you see is an absence of tension. That is reinforcing for a lot of the people that we work with. If you look at the third chart, you'll see at line 8 on the vertical line, we have a line drawn straight across. That line measures the possibility that a lethal incident could occur, that somebody could die. And here you see the incident goes up and it goes over that line. Maybe he choked her, maybe he held a gun on her, maybe he had knives. Something happened that she could have died. And then it goes down again, the tension and danger goes down. And again, in chart 3, you have loving contrition. He says, I'm sorry. Most don't. Most of them really just do something nicer so that they feel that he's really sorry. And then in the fourth chart, What you have is the tension and perception of danger goes up over the level 8 and stays up there. So she feels like she's walking on eggshells, that something bad can happen at any moment, that one of them could die. And if you notice, the loving contrition goes up and down a little bit, but never below that level 8. It stays up there all the time. Those are the cases that we're most frightened of, because those are the cases where they could indeed end up in a homicide or a suicide. I might mention that Dr. Van Hasselt, another faculty member here, and I are doing a study of murder-suicides in South Florida, because we have been named the highest, a region in the country with the highest number of murder-suicides, and so many of them include domestic violence. So we know that domestic violence is dangerous, and yet we can't force people to leave. In fact, leaving is the most dangerous time in a relationship. So we have to try to provide some safety for our client. We need her relationship not to have what we call triggers, so she needs no physical injury or sexual exploitation, no boundary violations, no harsh criticisms or punitiveness, and no underappreciation of the client's experiences from us, from her therapists. So she has to be in a safe relationship in order to be able to help her heal. She also needs safety from overwhelming internal experiences. We have to be clear and supportive. We have to make sure that her cognitive strength is strong enough before we start dealing with her affective regulation. And we have to check for level of emotional pain and distress all the time. So we really need to use a supportive type of intervention when we're working with battered women. So why doesn't she leave? Why doesn't a battered woman go? You know, that's still the question that so many people ask. When I testify in court, it's the most important question for jurors. Well, one reason, of course, is that love bond that's set up in phase 3 is still there. Another, because the abuse doesn't occur all the time, and she gets a lot of positive rewards from being in the relationship. Another is for her own psychology, her own psychological reasons. Another is financial need, although some women who have financial need are easier to get them to leave than those who are in a relationship with a lot of financial resources because they fear giving it up. And then, of course, there's the children. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So the biggest reason why a battered woman doesn't leave is she knows how dangerous it is to leave. It's the most likely time for greater harm or death. After all, the batterer is telling her all the time, if you leave me, I'll make sure no one else will have you. There are intervention programs for battered women, and we're going to talk about them later. But right now, if she does decide to leave, let's talk a little bit about what's new in dealing with the children. Well, first, we have new custody and parenting plans in Florida. Most people who work with domestic violence victims find these parenting plans to be not helpful for a battered woman. So she's more likely to lose control and custody of her children. The laws, the custody laws in Florida demand as a presumption that both parents should have access to the children, and both parents should be making decisions about the children's well-being. But that's not good for women in domestic violence relationships, and it's probably not good for the children themselves.